Chapter 1. The static between heartbeats. The wind had teeth. It slid between the cracked towers and gutted storefronts, whistling through broken glass, stirring plastic bags that clung to the asphalt like skin to bone. The cold was a constant thing, the kind that didn't fade even when you kept moving. It had a weight, pressing down on the shoulders, worming into the marrow. Reggie didn't say anything. Neither did Max. Neither did Joss. They'd learned long ago that words had a way of carrying farther than they should, bouncing off hollow concrete and out into the open streets where ears, or sensors, might be listening. They walked in a single file down what used to be a boulevard. The buildings were mostly hollow, their windows black, eyes watching them pass. Every so often, a sound, a distant groan of metal, the creak of an old sign in the wind, would make them freeze in place. Somewhere far off, a deep bass hum rolled through the air. It was low enough to be mistaken for distant thunder if you didn't know better. But they did. Max swallowed and adjusted the strap on the battered rucksack hanging from his shoulder. The sound meant one of them was nearby. One of those things. They'd never seen one up close, not for long, not and lived to talk about it. All they knew was the shape. For legs like a skeletal animal, body like a shrunken building, and a headless torso bristling with antennae and glass eyes that could see everything. They moved with a grace that was wrong for something so huge. The hum faded. The boys kept moving. They were headed toward the west side, where Joss swore there was still a pharmacy with shelves untouched. It was probably stripped bare like every other building, but sometimes the machines didn't sweep an area clean if it wasn't on their patrol paths. The silence in the city wasn't real silence. It was full of whispers. Not voices exactly, but the faint crackle of wires, the occasional clink of falling plaster, and the echo of their own footsteps scraping grit on the pavement. The absence of life, no cars, no dogs, no birds, was the loudest part. They reached an intersection where the pavement had buckled. A bus lay on its side across the street, its windows shattered, its interior frozen in time. A few shapes still sat slumped in the seats, brittle and dry. A strip of faded yellow caution tape fluttered weakly from the rearview mirror. "Let's go around," Joss whispered. They skirted the bus, stepping over chunks of brick and broken glass. Max tried not to look at the bodies, but his eyes betrayed him. One of them was missing its jaw. Another skull had been split open clean down the center like a cracked egg. Halfway down the block, they heard it. A deep, rhythmic thunk, metal on concrete, growing louder. Reggie froze mid-step. Max and Joss halted behind him, their breath catching in their throats. The sound grew closer. 4 beats, pause, for beats, pause. Heavy enough to make the ground shiver just a little. "Hide," Reggie mouthed. They darted into the nearest building, a gutted office block, the glass doors long gone. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust and rust. Light leaked in through cracks in the boarded-up windows. They crouched behind a half-collapsed reception desk, peeking through the gap between wall and counter. It emerged from around the corner. The thing was enormous, at least 15 feet tall at the shoulders, with long, jointed legs that ended in clawed pads. Its body was a slab of matte black plating, streaked with old rainwater and rust. No head, just a thick neck stump bristling with glassy, multi-lensed orbs and rotating antennae. Some of the lenses clicked and spun, focusing on invisible points in the air. Its movements were precise, almost quiet, except for the sharp thunk each footfall made. The air seemed to tighten around it, as though sound itself didn't want to get too close. Then came the smell, sharp and chemical, like burnt wires and blood. From beneath its belly, something hung in a steel harness, a limp human shape, pale and dripping, swinging slightly with each step. The torso had been opened neatly, ribs peeled back like petals to expose the wet organs inside. The head lolled at an angle that wasn't natural. Max felt his stomach twist. He pressed himself deeper into the shadow. The machine paused. One of its lenses swiveled, clicking toward the building. A faint red light blinked. They didn't move, didn't breathe. It stayed there for 3 long seconds, then turned away, its steps fading down the street until the hum bled back into silence. For a while, None of them moved. Finally, Joss whispered, "It had one. Hanging off it." "Don't," Reggie said. His voice was flat, but there was a tremor under it. "We need to keep moving before it comes back." Max glanced out the doorway. The street was empty again, but the cold air seemed sharper, charged with the aftertaste of something that shouldn't exist. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. Every building they passed seemed to loom taller now. Every alley felt like a mouth waiting to swallow them. They reached the pharmacy just as the sun began to sink behind the skeletal towers. The windows were shattered, but the front door was still locked. Reggie gave it a shove. It groaned, but didn't budge. "Move," Joss said. He swung his crowbar into the lock. The sound was loud, too loud. It cracked through the street like a gunshot. All three of them froze. Nothing moved. He swung again. The door gave way with a dry snap, swinging open on broken hinges. Inside, the air smelled faintly of mold and antiseptic. Shelves leaned like drunkards. Some collapsed entirely. A few still held bottles, cough syrup, vitamins, pills, and dusty blister packs. Max stuffed what he could into the bag. Then the hum came again, closer this time. They didn't have time to think. Reggie motioned for them to move deeper into the store toward the back rooms. The lights from the street dimmed as something huge passed in front of the broken window. The rhythmic thunk of the legs. The faint creak of metal under strain. The machine stopped outside the door. The red scanning beam cut through the dark like a knife. It swept slowly across the shelves, over the dust, and toward the back. They crouched behind an overturned shelf, trying to fold themselves into the floor. Something heavy shifted outside. Then silence. A sudden crash ripped through the building. The front wall buckled inward, glass and brick exploding across the floor. The machine forced itself halfway into the shop, its clawed legs punching through tiles. It was hunting. A long, segmented arm uncoiled from under its plating, ending in something like a cross between a scalpel and a claw. It moved with surgical precision, stabbing into aisles, ripping shelves apart. One jab missed Joss by inches, splintering the wood beside his head. He bit down on a scream. Reggie pointed toward the back exit. They moved low, keeping under the shelves as the arm tore through another row. Max's foot caught on a fallen box. The noise was tiny, just a rattle of pills, but the machine reacted instantly. The red beam snapped toward him. It lunged. The boys bolted for the back. The machine slammed into the floor where Max had been, tearing up tiles and sending a shockwave through the building. Its arm snatched at him, slicing open his backpack and spilling bottles across the floor. They burst through the rear door into an alley slick with frozen rainwater. The cold air hit them like a slap. Somewhere behind, the machine's claws scraped on concrete, the hum rising into a sharp metallic whine. They didn't look back. By the time they stopped running, their chests burned and the city had gone silent again. They stood in the shadow of an old overpass, the only sound their ragged breathing. Joss finally said, "We can't stay here. Not in this part of the city." Reggie stared back the way they came. He didn't speak for a long time. "We move at first light," he said. "Tonight we stay quiet." The cold sank deeper. Somewhere in the dark, miles away, something let out a mechanical howl. Chapter 2. The Hollow Hours. The concrete above their heads groaned in the wind. Every now and then, a small chunk of grit would drop from the overpass ceiling, tick against the asphalt, and vanish into the dark. They hadn't lit a fire. No flames, no smoke, nothing that could draw a sensor. Instead, they huddled together in their coats, knees pressed to chests, trying to keep the cold from crawling too far under their skin. Reggie sat with his back to a rusted pillar, his eyes fixed on the black mouth of the street beyond. Max and Joss stayed pressed into the deepest corner, where the shadows pooled thick and oily. No one said a word. The city was different at night. Not louder. The machines didn't sleep, but emptier, as if all the air had been pulled out of the world, leaving only a thin film of frost and a hum you felt in your bones. They heard it around midnight. A slow, deliberate thunk, 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 closer than before. Not on the road above, but on the street beneath the overpass. The kind of close that made the ground shake just enough to disturb the puddles near their feet. Max's breath fogged in the dim air. He clamped a hand over his mouth. From the edge of the shadows, the thing appeared. It was smaller than the one from earlier, maybe 10 feet at the shoulder, but it moved with a more cautious grace, its lenses scanning every corner as it advanced. Its matte body plating was slick with rain, its forelegs folding and unfolding like a spider's. From its underside dangled something new, a steel cage. Inside the cage, a human shape twitched. At first, Max thought it was alive. Then the head lolled forward, and the body's movement became a jerky, rhythmic shudder, the way meat trembles when something tears into it. The machine stopped directly under the overpass, as if listening. Then a hatch in its side split open. Something came out. It was like an arm, but not metal, a bundle of wet tubing ending in a fan of sharp silver needles. The tubes writhed slightly as they extended toward the cage. The needles pierced the shape inside. The sound that followed was a wet, sucking slurp. The tubes pulsed. Dark liquid traveled up into the machine, vanishing under its plating. Joss turned away, his shoulders shaking. Max stared, unable to look anywhere else. The cage's occupant sagged further, the twitching slowing until it stopped completely. The arm retracted with a slow, mechanical hiss. The cage dropped open, and the body tumbled out, hitting the asphalt with a dull, sodden thump. Its chest cavity was hollowed, ribs splayed outward, everything inside gone. The machine lingered over the corpse for a moment. Then it walked away, the hum fading into the distance. They didn't speak until the first trace of gray light began to bleed into the sky. "What?" Joss's voice cracked. "What was that?" Reggie's eyes were bloodshot, fixed on the spot where the body lay. "They're not just hunting us," he said. "They're feeding. Muck swallowed heart." The cold in his chest had nothing to do with the wind. By dawn, the body was gone. Not dragged, not torn apart. Gone, as if it had dissolved into the asphalt. The only sign it had been there was a faint, dark smear in the smell, coppery and chemical at the same time. Reggie stood, shouldered his bag. "We're heading east. There's an old maintenance tunnel by the river. If the entrances aren't sealed, we can hide there." The other two got to their feet without argument. They didn't look back. Chapter 3. Things that shouldn't move. The east side was worse. Buildings here leaned at sick angles, their skeletal frames jutting through the brick like bone. The streets were narrower, choked with debris and abandoned vehicles fused into the asphalt by years of frost. It felt tighter here, as though the city itself was folding inward. They moved in silence. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. Every now and then, Reggie would hold up a hand, and they'd all freeze, listening. Sometimes it was just the groan of ice expanding in a building's beams. Sometimes it wasn't. The first sign of other people came just after noon. They turned a corner and found a wall, a whole side of an old tenement, covered in smeared handprints. Dozens of them, overlapping, all pressed in some dark, crusted substance that had long since turned brown. The prints clustered around a hole in the wall, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. Joss crouched near it, sniffing the air. "Blood," he muttered. "Old," Reggie said. "Too old to be useful." Max didn't like the word useful when they were talking about people. They kept moving. As the afternoon deepened, the snow began to fall, not in flakes, but in fine, needle-like crystals that stung when they touched bare skin. It hushed the city even more, muffling their footsteps until they felt like ghosts passing through someone else's ruin. It was Joss who spotted the tracks. Half-frozen prints, human-sized, leading down an alley between two collapsed buildings. They weren't fresh, but they hadn't been buried under snow yet. Max looked at Reggie. "We follow." Reggie hesitated, scanning the skyline. The machines didn't leave prints, not like these, but following strangers had its own dangers. "Quick," he said at last. "No detours if it's bad." The alley narrowed to a passage barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. At the far end, the tracks led to a half-open door in a crumbling brick wall. Inside was dark. The smell hit them first, rot, chemical burn, and something faintly sweet. They stepped inside, flashlights off, letting their eyes adjust. When they could finally see, Max wished they hadn't. The room had once been a small workshop, maybe for repairs or storage. Now it was a nest. A ring of filthy blankets and shredded clothing lay piled in the center. The walls were covered in charcoal sketches, dozens, maybe hundreds of crude human figures, all drawn with exaggerated ribs and hollow, staring eyes. In the far corner, lashed to a chair with frayed cables, sat a man. At least would have been a man. His skin was paper-thin, stretched so tight it had split in places. Tubes snaked into his neck and chest, disappearing into a jury-rigged metal box bolted to the wall. His eyes were open but glassy, staring at nothing. Josh swallowed. Is he alive? Max took a step closer, and the man's lips trembled. A whisper, barely audible, hide. They didn't have time to ask questions. A sound came from the street. Not the thunk of the hunters, but a high, insect-like whirring. Reggie's face went white. Out. Now. They slipped back into the alley, just as something small and spidery skittered into view from the far end. It was no taller than Max's waist, but its thin legs moved with unnatural speed, the whir of its inner gears rising in pitch. Its head, if you could call it that, was a single black orb, glossy and wet-looking. It stopped at the workshop door. Max didn't see it move. One moment it was still, the next it had darted inside. The man's voice rose, a thin wail. Then silence, followed by the wet sound of something tearing. They ran until the alley gave way to open street. By the time they stopped, bent double and gasping for breath, the snow had begun to thicken, swallowing their footprints almost as soon as they made them. No one spoke for a long time. The image of the man, the tubes, the voice, clung to Max's mind like frostbite. Finally, Reggie said, "We keep moving. The tunnels aren't far." But the way he said it, Max knew he was thinking the same thing. The machines weren't just killing. They were keeping some people alive for something. Chapter 4. The breathing in the dark. By the time they reached the river, the daylight was already thinning into a steel-gray dusk. The water below the cracked embankment was a slow, sluggish current, carrying ice and debris under the half-collapsed bridge. Somewhere far down, a machine's hum vibrated faintly through the bones of the city. The maintenance tunnel entrance was a rectangular hatch of rusted steel set into the concrete wall. A faded stencil above it read, "City Waterworks, restricted." The paint was flaking, the letters eaten away by time. Reggie knelt, brushed away the snow, and yanked on the handle. It didn't budge at first, but after a few grunts and a metallic groan, the hatch swung inward. A breath of stale, wet air rolled out, heavy, damp, and faintly sour. They climbed down the narrow ladder, one by one. The metal rungs were slick under their gloves. Inside, the tunnel swallowed them whole. The air was thick, the only light coming from the faint glow through the hatch above. When Reggie shut it, the dark became absolute. Max could hear the water running somewhere below their feet, and his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Josh clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through dust and floating motes, revealing curved concrete walls slick with condensation. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping slow, steady droplets that echoed in the silence. They moved deeper, the tunnel bending and dipping until the sound of the river above faded into nothing. It should have been abandoned, but it wasn't. The first sign was a smell, faint at first, then stronger as they walked. Something sour, organic, layered over the damp scent of the tunnels. Then came the marks, scrapes along the walls, thin at the start, then deeper. Not claw marks, more like something had been dragged, metal grinding into concrete. Farther in, they found the first pile. It was clothing, shirts, jackets, boots, all rotted and stiff, heaped against the wall like trash. Beneath them, the floor was dark with old stains. Joss knelt, lifted a coat, and found that the sleeves ended in jagged, torn edges instead of seams. They pressed on, the smell now thick enough to taste. The tunnel widened into a service chamber, a round space with a grated floor above sluggish black water. The ceiling dripped steadily, each drop sending ripples into the water below. And there, in the far corner, something was breathing. It was slow and wet, like a bellows pulling air through clogged filters. The sound didn't match the stillness of the figure itself, a hunched shape draped in layers of cloth and plastic sheeting, motionless in the beam of Joss's light. Reggie raised a hand, warning them not to move. The shape twitched. The cloth shifted, and something pale slid into view, a face or what had been one. The skin was too tight, pulled in unnatural directions by thin black wires that disappeared into the layers of cloth. The eyes were glassy, milk-white, unfocused. The mouth opened. "Don't go back," it rasped. The words were wet, each syllable pulled out like it hurt. The cloth fell away. What sat in the corner wasn't a man anymore. The torso was sunken, ribs like knives under skin. Where the legs should have been, metal supports jutted into the floor, fused into the grating. Tubes snaked from its chest into the wall behind it, pulsing faintly. Max stumbled back, boots scraping metal. The thing's head twitched toward the sound, fast, too fast, and it let out a sharp mechanical click. From somewhere behind the wall, a low hum started, growing in pitch. Reggie's face went hard. "Run!" The hum deepened, and the thing in the corner moved. Not by lifting itself, its legs were anchored, but by pulling on the tubes and wires, wrenching its upper body forward with jerks that made bones snap under skin. Its hands clawed at the air, reaching for them with fingers that ended in hooked steel. They didn't look.